Welcome back, sleepyhead. Or maybe it's your first time here. Either way, I'm glad you've arrived. Tell me what's your favorite way to unwind before bed. Write it below while the rain begins to fall. And if you'd like me to read to you again, just subscribe and leave a like. I'll be here every night. Now, let's begin our little ritual. I hadn't planned to stay long. A few days, maybe. Just enough to breathe in something that wasn't exhaust fumes or flickering screens or the constant low hum of obligation. The town wasn't even on the map I'd printed, which in itself felt like a small mercy. I'd followed a crooked side road, the kind you only take when you're not in a hurry, and ended up in a place that didn't seem to mind my arrival. No signs, no questions, just a narrow bridge, a quiet inn with a red roof and no name, and a river that moved like it had nothing left to prove. That first night, I didn't unpack. I barely spoke. The woman at the desk handed me a key with no formalities, only a soft, "You'll hear it from your window. Don't worry, it's always like that." I didn't know what she meant until I lay down. The room was plain, with soft sheets and a single lamp that hummed gently when switched on. But outside, faint beneath the wind and the occasional shifting of the old building's bones, was the river. It wasn't loud. It didn't roar. It moved like breath, steady, long, patient. I left the window cracked open and listened as I fell asleep. It was the first time in weeks that my thoughts hadn't tried to outrun me. The next morning, I walked down to the river. There wasn't a clear path, just the kind of grass that bends willingly under quiet steps. The water was clear, but not pristine. Lived in, as though it remembered every leaf that had ever drifted across its surface. I sat on a low stone and just watched. That was all. And that was enough. Around midday, a man passed by carrying a basket of something wrapped in cloth. He nodded, not surprised to see me there, not curious. Just a nod that said, "Yes, that's a good place to be." I stayed until the light began to tilt. The river never changed its rhythm, but I noticed how the light played tricks with the surface, how certain stretches looked deeper, slower, when the sun hit them just right. And for a moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not relief, not even peace, just space. A little room inside me opened. That night, I sat by the window again. The river was still there. Of course it was. But as I drifted into sleep, I had a strange impression that the sound of it had changed. It wasn't louder, just closer, like it had moved slightly toward me, or I had moved toward it. I dreamt of water, though not in a dramatic way, just slow-moving reflections, shapes I couldn't quite make out. One looked like a child, one like a letter never sent, one like a version of myself I hadn't visited in years. I woke before dawn, with the window still open, the river still moved, still breathing its old patient rhythm, and somewhere in me, without fanfare or certainty, I felt it begin, a remembering I hadn't asked for but maybe needed all along. The next day, I returned to the same stone by the river. I didn't bring a book, didn't bring my phone. I sat with my hands resting quietly in my lap, watching the water the way you watch someone breathe when they don't know you're paying attention. It was cooler than the day before. The wind came in slow exhalations from the hills beyond the bridge, and the surface of the river shifted gently, like a sheet being smoothed out by invisible hands. I told myself I wasn't expecting anything. But the truth was, I had come looking for something I just didn't know what. Maybe a thought, maybe silence, maybe the next layer of stillness. Around mid-morning, the light hit the water in a way that made the current nearly invisible. For a moment, it looked like glass. I leaned forward slightly, not to look at my reflection, but to see into it. And what I saw wasn't me. Not exactly. The face in the water didn't match the angle of my own. It was younger, fuller in the cheeks, hair a little longer. Eyes not mine, but familiar. I blinked once, twice. The shape remained, but only for a few seconds. Then a ripple passed through it, soft and final, and the face vanished. I didn't gasp. I didn't jerk back. I just sat there, strangely calm, because something in me recognized what had just happened not as something unnatural, but as something remembered, like an old song you haven't heard in years that somehow comes back to you note for note. I stayed by the river all afternoon, watched the water take on new moods as the sky shifted. Once I heard laughter not loud, not near, just faint and behind me, though I knew no one was there. It sounded like the kind of laugh people only let out when they're not trying to be heard. The kind that belongs to an old story, retold for the 100th time. That evening, I returned to the inn with a small weight in my chest. Not a burden, more like the beginning of a thought too large for words. I asked the woman at the desk quietly, "Has the river always been like this?" She didn't ask what I meant. She just looked up from her book and replied, "It shows you what you're ready to carry." I nodded as if I understood. Part of me did. That night, I sat again by the window, listening. The sound of the water was the same, but I was different. I had started to hear the quiet between the ripples. I closed my eyes and breathed in slowly. Somewhere in the space between sleep and waking, I saw a set of hands cupping water. Weathered hands, strong, gently lifting something from the current. I didn't see what. I only felt what it meant. This isn't about answers. This is about receiving. And for the first time in a long while, I fell asleep without reaching for anything to hold on to. By the third day, I stopped thinking of it as routine. It wasn't something I did. It was something I returned to, like visiting a friend who doesn't speak much, but always knows what you mean. I walked to the familiar slope behind the inn, through grass bent with dew, and sat on the same stone by the river. It was already waiting. It always was. I didn't ask for anything, not aloud, not in my thoughts. I just watched, listened, trusted the rhythm of water moving over stone to say whatever needed to be said. The light that morning was soft and scattered, and the surface of the river shimmered like a page being turned by unseen hands. For the first hour, nothing unusual happened. Then, slowly, something shifted downstream. A shape, small, floating gently toward me, caught in the slow curl of the current. I stood without rushing, walked a few steps along the bank, and crouched as the shape came closer. It was a photograph, wet but not falling apart. edges softened, but the image intact, a black and white print. An Aita woman, standing near what looked like a porch, hands folded in front of her, a small smile, eyes looking not at the camera, but just past it. And beside her, a child, maybe 5 or 6, holding a stick like a sword, caught mid-motion. It wasn't the kind of picture you'd find online. It was personal, stilled breath, something once tucked into a book or drawer. I turned it over, nothing written, no date, no names. Still something in me stirred a heat in the chest, not recognition but resonance, like when you hear a voice you've never heard before and somehow feel comforted. I held the photograph for a while, then laid it on a sun-warmed stone to dry. The wind didn't move it. The river didn't ask for it back. I didn't think the photo was for me, and yet it was now with me, as if the river had decided, you can hold this for a while, just until someone else needs it. That evening, I asked the woman at the desk if she knew anyone who'd lost a photo. I didn't expect her to say yes. She didn't, but she looked at the image for a long time, then said, "She's not from here, but she belongs here." I didn't press. I just nodded and returned to my room. I placed the photo on the small table beside the lamp, turned it so the woman in the picture faced the window. That night, the river sound felt different again, slower, heavier almost, like it had shared something with effort, like even memory, when carried across time and water, has weight. I lay in bed thinking not about who the woman was, but who she might have been to someone, and how long that someone had waited to feel her again. Before I fell asleep, I whispered, "I'll keep her safe." Not because she was mine, but because some things don't need to be claimed to be held with care. That night, I dreamt of the porch, not in fragments or suggestions, but fully, tangibly. I could feel the wood under my bare feet, sun-warmed and slightly splintered. The smell of old paint and lilacs drifted through the air, and somewhere nearby someone laughed softly. Not the child, not yet. He was still crouched behind the railing, lining up tiny rocks as if preparing for battle. But the woman, she was standing, just as she had in the photograph, only now she was alive within the moment, not moving, not speaking, just being. The way some people fill a space without effort. I stood on the edge of the scene, unsure if I was meant to be there. She didn't look at me, but she didn't seem surprised either, as if the world she inhabited had made room for me long ago, and now that I was quiet enough, it simply allowed me in. I didn't speak, didn't move closer. I just sat down on the step beside the door and listened. There was no music, no grand silence, just the slow rhythm of a summer day remembered well. The boy laughed suddenly, that open, wholehearted kind of laugh children make when they're not being watched. He ran past me, stick in hand, shouting something I couldn't understand, but understood all the same. A game, a declaration. The thrill of being 5 years old and victorious over nothing at all. The woman turned slightly toward the motion, and for a fraction of a second, her gaze passed through me, not at me, through me like warm wind through a screen. In that moment, something clicked inside, not in the mind, in the chest. A feeling I hadn't carried in a long time, belonging without reason. Then, without transition, I woke up, my eyes open to the soft gray light before dawn, the sound of the river steady and near. The room was still, the photo exactly where I had left it, on the small table facing the window. But now, I looked at it differently, not as a found object, not as a mystery, but as proof of something I could no longer deny. The river remembered, and, for a little while, it had let me remember too. I got dressed slowly, shoes in hand, and made my way down to the water. The sky hadn't fully brightened yet, but the air was already shifting. Cool, damp, alive. I sat on my usual stone and said aloud, not loudly, but clearly, "Thank you for letting me in." I didn't expect an answer, but a bird called once from a branch above me. A single note, clean, unrehearsed. I smiled. Because sometimes the world doesn't need to answer with language. Sometimes being heard is its own reply. By the 5th day, I had stopped pretending this was just about rest. It wasn't vacation. It wasn't escape. It was something closer to return, even if I couldn't name the place I was returning to. The river had become part of my breathing. The quiet of it moved in and out of me without asking. I no longer sat only on the stone. Sometimes I stood with my shoes off, toes in the cold silt at the edge, watching the current pass like thoughts I didn't have to catch. That morning, something floated near again, not sudden, not eerie, just expected. Like the way a letter arrives days after you stop checking the mailbox, but on the exact morning you finally need it. It was a key. Simple. Brass. Small. Like for a drawer or a box, not a door. I picked it up slowly, water dripping from its notches, and the moment my fingers wrapped around it, a wave passed through Minot, physical, not cold, but deep. Like a memory brushing past the inside of my ribs, I closed my eyes, and there it was, a drawer, wooden, worn. I saw my hand open it, papers inside. A small green notebook with a sticker on the front half peeled. I had forgotten it. Completely. But now I could smell it. The way old paper smells when it's lived in a warm house. My childhood room. I was 10. Maybe 11. Writing stories that no one read. Secrets even I didn't understand. I had hidden the notebook because it felt too honest, too mine. And I'd lost it, or thought I had. I opened my eyes, the key still in my hand, and I realized the river had kept it. Not literally, of course, not in some magical sense, but in the way it had reached into the quiet and found the part of me I hadn't spoken to in years. That evening, back in my room, I searched my travel bag. Deep in one pocket was a small leather case I hadn't used in forever. I unzipped it slowly. Inside maps, receipts, a pen, and beneath them, pressed flat, a folded page torn from a notebook. My handwriting, rounder, younger, it read. The boy who lived by the river knew it was alive, but he'd never said it out loud. I sat down, holding the paper in my lap, stunned, not by the words, but by the fact that I had written them, that I had once known, without understanding, the very thing I was rediscovering now. That somewhere in me, even back then, the river already existed. That night, the river sounded different again. Not louder, not closer, but more certain, like a voice that no longer hesitated. I lay in bed with the window wide open and the key resting on the table beside the old photograph. Neither object explained anything, but neither had to, because both of them, like the river, trusted me to carry what they gave without needing to understand why. And I did. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. Enough to whisper into the dark one more time. I remember now. I remember me. The next morning, I didn't go to the river empty-handed. I woke up slowly, not from sleep, but from some kind of stillness deeper than sleep, and knew without needing to think it was time to give something back. I searched through my bag, not for anything valuable, but for something real, something that still carried the weight of who I had been. In one of the side compartments, I found it. A small stone I had picked up years ago from a beach I no longer remembered the name of. Smooth, almost heart-shaped. I had carried it with me through 2 apartments, a breakup, and more mornings than I could count. Not as a lucky charm, just as a piece of silence I hadn't been ready to let go of, until now. I wrapped the stone in a piece of old cloth, the kind you'd use to wipe glasses or a screen. Nothing dramatic, just enough to say, this mattered. I walked to the river before the sun fully rose. The air was cool and held the kind of hush that makes even birds think twice before calling out. I didn't rush. When I reached the edge, I crouched and laid the bundle carefully on a flat rock by the water. I didn't toss it in. That felt wrong. The river wasn't a wishing well or a void to be filled. It was a listener, a holder, a keeper. So I left it there not as a trade, not as payment, but as acknowledgement. I whispered, "You held part of me. Now I'll let go of part of me too." I waited a long time just watching. The river didn't take the stone right away. The cloth stayed dry at first, but after a while, a breeze stirred the edge of it, nudging it just enough that one corner touched the water. The cloth darkened slowly, absorbed the flow, and when I left, the bundle was still there, still whole, still waiting. But I knew it would be received in its own time. That night, back in my room, the photograph on the table had curled slightly at the corners, not ruined, just aged a little more, like it had sighed. I sat by the window again, the key in my hand, running my thumb across its grooves like reading a language I didn't speak but somehow felt fluent in. The river sang its usual low melody through the window, but for the first time I felt it wasn't singing to me anymore. It was singing with me. I whispered into the dark, "This isn't goodbye. It never was." And the wind answered not with a gust, not with a chill, but with the smallest change in pressure, like someone passing by, gently, respectfully, presence. That's all. And it was more than enough. I went to the river as I always did, the same slow walk down the back path behind the inn, the grass now bending with familiarity, no longer wet from dew but softened by use. I knew every tilt of the trees, every dip in the path where the stones like to hide. And still, each morning felt new, except this one, because this morning, for the first time since I arrived, the river gave me nothing. No sound beyond its usual rhythm, no shape drifting toward me, no shift in the current, no memory, just water, moving as it always had, As it always would, I sat on the stone anyway, hands folded, eyes open, and waited. But nothing came, not outside me. I looked across the surface for even a hint of reflection, not my own, a flicker of something unsummoned, but the river showed me only me. I wasn't disappointed, not exactly, more quieted, like when you open a letter expecting news and find only a blank page and realize that somehow that is the message. I stayed a long time, longer than usual, letting the stillness press into me like a soft hand on the back. And slowly I began to understand. The river wasn't done with me. It had simply said what it needed to say. Now, it was listening back. I walked the edge, careful not to slip on the damp stones, and stopped at the spot where I had left the small bundle 2 mornings before. It was gone. Not a thread left, not a mark. The rock was bare, except for a single dry leaf resting where the cloth had once been. No wind had moved it. It just sat there, perfectly placed. A placeholder. A whisper. Thank you. That night, I didn't sit by the window. I didn't need to. I lay on the bed, not reaching for the photograph or the key, both of which now lived in the drawer side by side. They didn't need to be seen. They had already been received. The river still flowed outside, of course. But I didn't need to listen to hear it. I felt it in the stillness between heartbeats. I had brought enough of it inside me now, and as I drifted toward sleep, I realized I hadn't thought about leaving in days. Not because I wanted to stay forever, but because I no longer feared what came next. I whispered, not aloud, but inward, "You've done enough. Thank you for all of it." And the silence didn't answer. It didn't need to. I left on a Tuesday. No reason for that day, except that I woke with the kind of clarity that doesn't ask to be explained. The sky was clear, the air light, no pull to stay, no rush to go, just readiness, the kind that hums quietly inside the ribs when something has finished growing. I packed slowly, not because I was uncertain, but because I wanted to say goodbye to the room the way one says goodbye to a friend, without drama, but with attention. I folded the blanket I had used each night and placed it over the chair by the window. I ran my hand along the surface of the desk where the photograph had once sat, now tucked safely inside the last page of my notebook, the key too resting beside it, not as souvenirs, as companions. I didn't take one last look at the river. I didn't need to. It had already come with me, thread by thread, moment by moment, until it had become part of how I breathed. But still, as I passed the front desk, the woman looked up, her expression unchanged from the day I'd arrived, and yet somehow different. I said simply, "Thank you," and she, in the same voice she used when she handed me the key that first night, replied, "You're always welcome to return, but I don't think you'll need to." Outside, the road curved gently toward the hills, and I drove slowly, windows down, letting the wind write whatever farewell the moment needed. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just was, fully, softly, awake. At the edge of town, just before the bridge, I pulled over, not because I changed my mind, just because something in me wanted to mark the moment. I stepped out and walked to the guardrail. The river moved below, steady, unhurried, as if it had never held a single secret and yet knew all of them. I whispered, "I'll carry you." The breeze lifted for just a second, brushing the edge of my sleeve like a nod, like a hand on the shoulder. Not goodbye, just go on now. I returned to the car and drove forward. And as the road pulled me gently away from the river, I realized something simple and whole and true. I hadn't come here to find answers. I had come to remember how to listen. And now I could listen anywhere,